Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Kapchis, obviously with Chestnut Park Real Estate. My podcast co-host, let him introduce himself.
I'm Doug Gubitz. Thank you very much, Chris.
We're thrilled to be here again. For those of you that can see the wines on the table, as you know, the theme of our podcast is the decanting of real estate.
Decanting Real Estate.
Decanting Real Estate. Thanks for that correction.
Yeah.
And in the past, we've decanted some amazing wines coming from Doug's wine cellar.
Well, that's not entirely true. They did come from my wine cellar, but they weren't always amazing wines, if you recall. Le Croix Saint Georges. Okay. I'm still reeling from that.
He hasn't recovered from the very first
From your
wine
criticism. No, it was number 2.
Was it number 2? Yeah. But for those of you that can see the wines that are on the table, they're not Bordeaux's.
They're not even European.
Not even European. In fact, they're local and very local.
Extremely local.
Both of these wines are from Prince Edward County.
And I'm looking forward to that.
Where we, Chestnut Park, has an office in beautiful downtown Picton.
Yep. So thank you to the Picton office for your lovely wines.
And we've chosen these wines. I'm going to take credit for this.
Well, you chose the
chose
wines. I
these
didn't
wines for a variety of reasons. One, I think we'd had enough of the Bordeaux's.
Oh, my God.
2, everyone knows what we're going through with the American administration, the tariffs, and so focusing back on Canada and focusing on everything that's local, I think was very appropriate under the
Yeah,
circumstances.
I agree. That's a good idea. We might go back to Bordeaux one day.
We might,
Yeah.
no question.
We will.
We have a Chardonnay and we have a Pinot Noir. We were going to do 2 Chardonnays, but I thought the other Chardonnay that I chose, which is from Huff Vineyard, also in Prince Edward County, that actual wine is called Catherine.
Lovely name.
Yeah. However, I had a look at the tasting notes, and I thought they would challenge even you.
Oh, no way.
Yes, listen to this. This was the tasting notes.
I love Chardonnay.
So do I, as you know. But just listen to this.
I'm
In
listening.
fact, it aside from the actual taste, the tasting notes are mind-boggling. So I could only imagine the impact that they would have on your palate.
Quoi?
Mid-straw yellow. Okay,
I can live with that.
we could live with that. With a greenish tint. I think maybe you should open that Chardonnay.
Okay.
It's Classon Chase. It's a vineyard Chardonnay.
Yes, you like this vineyard.
It's a lovely, lovely,
All right.
lovely vineyard.
Great.
So let's just see if it's mid-straw yellow
Okay.
with a greenish tint.
We're not decanting today, as you can appreciate.
Yeah, well,
it's white.
the-
It's white and it's screw top. Okay. Well, what do you say? I'm not catching any green.
I would say it's mid-straw, but I'm not catching any greenish
Green.
tint. No.
No.
In its understated adolescent state,
Yeah.
look for aromas of pure orange,
I can smell it here already. It's pretty.
pear,
vibrant. Yeah.
blossom, white floral notes.
Well, it's very aromatic.
It's coming, right?
Hugely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can taste a lean, edgy style with recurring pear, hints of orange picot. Are you getting orange picot?
I need a moment to pick
I
up
was
the
getting
orange.
more like Earl Grey.
Where are you? You haven't even smelled it yet, and you're already catching the Earl Grey.
How about lime pith?
Yeah, I'm catching a lot of lime pith.
Lime
actually.
pith?
What is lime pith?
I don't know.
Oh.
Astride, a lovely core of acidity and a wisp of oak influence.
Well, you'll pick up the yolk. You're good on that. Will you just take a smell of it first?
This
please?
is a pure mineral essence in a cool climate setting.
Okay. Well, it smells great. I haven't tried it yet, but what do you think, Christian?
If someone can detect all of those aromas,
Yeah. There's no green on it.
I guess his
FYI.
last name would be Parker.
He's retired.
He's retired?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think?
Well, it is a cool climate tasting Chardonnay. I'm not picking up the oak, but I find it a nicely balanced, easy to drink. It's got a nice finish. It's got some crisp apple kind of
I would
tartness
get the
to it.
apple too.
Yeah, it's got a nice crisp.
I would say it has a Chablis-like quality.
Yeah, even actually better than some low-price Chablis. Nice pick. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
What are we going to decant today, Doug?
Well, I think you and I discussed that. We're still kind of ruminating and exploring what's happening to the condo market, particularly the investor condo market in Toronto. We talk about it all the time. It's back in the newspapers pretty consistently because developers who have been continuously producing condos for the investor marketplace have now had to pivot. And I don't know if they are currently pivoting. Now they're talking about pivoting. And where can they pivot?
I think they've already started to pivot. Just to interrupt you, we've seen it in the sense that in some cases, projects that were slated to be condominium apartment projects have been converted to rental.
This is delicious.
Thank you. This is local,
This is
200
amazing.
kilometers away,
This is really
and available in the LCBO.
wonderful wine.
Yeah.
Very enjoyable.
Thank you. We'll see how you feel about the Pinot Noir.
So you're right. A lot of developers are now contemplating converting their buildings that were to be condo to rental.
Correct.
But it's a big commitment because it's a long-term.
Yeah, you're not in and out the way you are in a condo project.
And you're in the business of being
Correct.
a landlord unless you're selling it off to a
A
third-party
REIT
REIT or
yeah.
something. So that's one option that they're looking at. And we've been reading, and you raised it at our most recent office meeting, about developers instead trying to retool the mix of units to appeal more to the user, owner, occupier.
Yeah, we should sort of back up a little bit because going back to the previous podcast, one of the things that we discussed at length was the fact that the units that were being built were, to use an expression that we hear on the street, matchbox units.
It's actually your expression.
400 to 500 square feet that were not, in some cases even smaller, the studio apartments.
Well, you even talked about the phenomenon of the Japanese era condominium, 235 square feet, where the
Correct.
bed comes down and the kitchen exposed. and
Correct.
things. Yeah.
No wine cellar in those units.
No wine cellar. That's true. There's no anything in those
No
units.
anything.
So
In any event, it's that type of unit that developers are now talking about getting away from. And to use your expression, I mean, they're trying to get to the point where they're going to build for end users, potentially even end users that have families.
we've been complaining about this for the longest time, that there's no place.
Forever.
Right, who's going to live in these units, and how do we develop? How does this city evolve when only dormitory style units exist in the vast majority of the downtown core and elsewhere? How does that change, and why will it change?
And as you know, from the discussions that we've had, some of the developers are talking about reconfiguring buildings that were already slated to go the other route, where literally they were sold within 2 or 3 weeks. And I think we should make it clear to our viewers that those units were commodities, and I think we used that expression in our previous podcast.
I even go so far as to call them derivative products, derivative financial products.
Yeah, where basically they were just for investors who were picking them up, holding them, hoping to sell them in the future, making money off them as rental units, sometimes selling them through assignments even before registration. But that's gone now. Now sales are going to have to take place over potentially 2 years.
Or more.
Or more. And they're going to have to take a different sales technique.
You and I have been very bothered by this, the littering of our city with units that are not designed for people to live in.
100%.
So who do those, once the investor has purchased it from the land speculator, developer, who's going to ever live there? It's a very transient audience, right? It's students, it's singles. And we've been bothered by this phenomenon that every one of these 50, 60, 70-story buildings are just littered with essentially units that are only functional for a very, very, very small component of our demographic. How do you transition away from that?
Well,
and I think that's what we're dealing with
yes,
now.
And I felt encouraged by those comments.
But
I think we're slightly at odds here, because you're not as encouraged about the possibility that they're going to reconfigure buildings so that you have 3-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartments, and even larger 1-bedroom apartments that could be for end users that could be there for lengthy periods of time, as opposed to, as you say, transient students, singles. But why aren't
I'm not discouraged. I not at all. I actually am encouraged by the thought that a builder who's trying to make money, who cannot sell to the investor market any longer, is now, and good for them, thinking about what's another target audience. Well, maybe it's actual people who are going to make a life in these buildings. That's great news, and I'm glad to hear it, and we're reading a lot about it in the papers, and we're seeing developers go that way. They're going to reconfigure their units entirely, add, combine 2 and 3 1-bedroom units into a more livable accommodation. How does it actually happen? So, although I'm excited about the concept, I really am very skeptical. And I've spoken to you about this before. How does this actually really translate in the real world, on our streets, on our intersections?
Well,
How does it happen?
I think,
and is it real? Is it really going to happen?
But I think the problem, and both of us are ad idem in this regard, is that if you're going to build a decent project encompassing the kind of units that we're talking about, say a 3-bedroom unit that is minimally 1,200 square feet. And I think you'd need about 1,200 square feet, if not more, to have a decent
1,200 is the minimum.
Minimum. And then where we have a problem with that is cost per square foot, given all of the issues that developers have to deal with, development costs, financing, land costs, construction costs, materials. Can you make it work?
This is exactly what.
Or do we, and you and I have talked about this, and I'll preempt you, are we looking at Manhattan?
Yeah, my theory is this the Manhattan effect? And that's what gives you and I pause and concern, that although it's an excellent idea, we've been calling for this for some time. In real life, though, I'm not sure it's going to work. So let's take a building, for example, that's going up currently at Yonge and Eglinton. Whatever building it, there's so many of them. And it's a 60-story building with a mix heavily oriented to the investor. So, 455, 550, 600 square foot units. There's no investor market to buy it, so the developer has to make a serious choice. Am I turning this into an entire rental building, or am I going to reconfigure it to make it a user building,
right,
a livable owner-occupier building for the medium to long term? So you reconfigure all these suites, or a big portion of them. Who's going to buy it? Here we are stuck in that paradigm shift. Who's buying a 12 or 13 or 1,350 square foot, 2.5 or 3-bedroom unit for the same price? We're right back to our old discussion.
Exactly.
For the exact same price that you can buy a 3-bedroom, bricks and mortar on the ground, semi-detached house in one of our lovely leafy neighborhoods in Toronto for $1.5 million or $1.6 million. With a backyard and a place to park in the front and a finished basement and all of these nice things to raise a family. And who's going to choose the condo?
And they might, only because those particular housing types that you've mentioned, and I'm in full agreement with
Low
you.
supply.
Low supply. Recently we were looking at the data coming out of the Toronto Real Estate Board, and we saw how few semi-detached properties they were in some of the more sought-after areas, and in fact, throughout the city of Toronto. So they may be forced to buy there only because there's such low supply. So it might work, Doug.
And then that family is going to be living in amongst a building of 400 or 500 units. Many of them are still going to be smaller
That's not
unit.
entirely true. The ones that I was looking at, they were talking about 150 to 160
But that's not
units.
going to work in the grand scheme of things because land is too expensive. So if you look at buildings near our office, for example, you look at the Jake's building right across the street. Every one of those, because it's a low-rise building of 7, 8, or 9 stories, I can't remember, every one of those units is terribly expensive. Makes sense. If you can go up 30 stories and put a bunch of small units, you as a developer can make some money. If you're going to only put up 7, 8, 9, 10 stories, you need large units at large dollars. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this at
So
all.
large units at large dollars, hence,
The Manhattan effect, meaning my concern, and I think you share my concern, is that what we have done in our city in the past, if we wish to convert it to a more user-oriented environment, it is sadly only going to be for the moneyed class, because there are no regular people on the street who are going to be able to afford these 2.5 and 3-bedroom units in a low-rise, low-density building. The units by nature have to be enormously expensive. Otherwise, the developer's not even going to bother with the project. They're better off putting up a 60-story rental building and selling it to a REIT.
yeah, that's just time in that case.
So unless we have a massive, and I mean massive shift downwards in prices in Toronto.
And how is that?
And that's not going to happen. So we're stuck with, if we want livable units in Toronto, in core neighborhoods on main streets, they're going to have to be very, very expensive, which is going to preclude the masses of people in Toronto who are trying to find a way to have a life in this city. We're going to be only like Manhattan, where every unit is hugely expensive. And if you want to live in Manhattan, you can't. So you move out to the suburbs.
Right.
You go to Long Island, you go to all the other peripheral neighborhoods that support the bedroom communities that support Manhattan. And that's what's going to happen in Toronto. And I think that's a sad state of affairs. There's only one solution.
Which is?
I think we have to change the zoning laws in the city.
Well, they've been trying to do that for some time, and to some extent have.
A really substantial change where we zone usable, developable land for rental purposes only. Because by doing that and giving incentives to we're not going to get into the business as a government of building apartment buildings
What
in
about
Toronto.
the dream of home ownership there?
That has to be out in the periphery. That still exists. It's just that it becomes the suburban dream. We're already seeing it now. In our last office meeting, as you recall, we were looking at the numbers between 416 and 905 on the detached and semi-detached and townhouse basis. Take the condo discussion out of it for a second. Look what's happening. The average detached house price in Toronto is at about $1.8 million.
Detached house, almost $1.8 million.
Yeah. And that's a much larger, more...
And in the core, where our office is located, it's about $2.5 million.
Right. So
That's the average.
average. So, but look what's happening in the 905, and that's even the near 905 to us, not the 905
just
north.
And as we discussed, there's a land transfer tax issue there as well. You benefit if you buy up
Yeah.
there because you're not paying land transfer tax
Twice. So look what you can get for the average sale price of a detached house 905 this week was 1.3-ish. No,
1.350.
1.350 versus 1.8. You get a house easily twice the size with a double private driveway and a double garage, and as you love to talk about, 4 or 5 bathrooms. And that's
I will explain that at some point in time for our
it's actually
our
very,
viewers.
It's actually a very good story. Chris
But
is
we
very-
don't have enough time
Chris
today.
is very bothered by the number of bathrooms and houses. So I think what we're going to see is Toronto is going to see the Manhattan effect just a little later than it happened in New York. Well, quite a bit later, probably 50 years perhaps. But that's the trajectory. If we are successful in getting these developers to convert to usable, livable condominium units, it precludes just about everybody the working class of Torontonians will be precluded from
It's a
buying in those
very
buildings.
dark scenario you're painting.
But you know I'm right.
Sadly,
Yeah,
sadly,
that's it is a sad reality.
yeah.
So, a building across the street, for example, from our office, there's two development proposals, as you know, two very substantial development proposals. The one is a 3-story or 2-story apartment building right now from the 1960s or 50s, maybe even 40s, and one is a small office building. Both have a 47 or 50 floor tower proposal. The vast majority of those suites are under 600 square feet. They too will shift.
They will have to shift.
They will shift,
yeah.
and they will shift to larger suites. But that land is enormously expensive, and it's in a posh community. So it's going to be a wealthy development like Scrivener Square. And then people who want to live in the midtown of the city for reasonable amounts of money will be precluded.
At that point, you bring me back to the wines, Doug.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the bathrooms. Okay, go ahead.
I'll tell you why. Because at least we have affordable wines.
Do you want to? I don't know how much these wines cost.
Unlike those posh wines
That
from
I brought,
Bordeaux
that I
you
brought, right.
These are much more affordable wines, and I would say probably in some cases, depending on the ones that you brought, a third, if not even less.
Well, drink local is a pretty good idea.
Yeah. I think you should try the
Pinot Noir?
The Pinot Noir.
I'm very impressed with this, I must admit.
That's why I brought it, Doug.
You and I
try-
have drunk quite a bit of Chardonnay
Yeah.
together over the years.
But try the Pinot Noir.
Okay.
So what Doug was referring to is the
It's really good.
2021 Classon Chase. It's their vineyard Chardonnay. So one,
How many bottles have they produced of that a year?
that I don't know.
Oh, come
that
on.
I don't know.
If you're going to bring wine, you need those kind of numbers.
But maybe you can speak to what you're opening
So this is a Pinot Noir from the county
from the county.
by a producer by the name of Norman Hardy. I
Yes.
think many of you know the Norman Hardy wines. And it has a very light alcohol level of 12.5%.
Yes.
Which is very appealing to me.
Yeah, but you'll find it so appealing on the palate.
This is also a screw cap.
Yeah, Doug has a story about screw caps, but we're going to save it in the interest of time for the next podcast.
I was going to say this might be corked, but it can't be corked. It could be
That
screw
would be
capped.
that would be bizarre.
It could be capped.
It could be capped, but not corked.
Great color.
Wonderful.
Very,
color. Just
very
look at
French-looking
that.
Pinot Noir
Oh, my
color.
God.
Very Burgundian.
Yeah, it very much Burgundian. I don't know whether it's the room that we're in, but it even has a slight rust.
Yeah. What year is this one? Do we know that?
It should be on the bottle.
It should be.
21, I think.
It doesn't say.
Oh, the nose is brilliant.
Being a Euro wine
Oh my God.
person, you should be impressed with my open-mindedness.
I am
to
totally, completely. That's why we have a podcast together.
I am being extremely open-minded. This smells great. Really good. Well done, brother. Very impressive. Okay, I love the nose. I would have thought this was a European, well, of course, a French Pinot from Burgundy. It has a great Burgundian nose.
Could be a Burgundy.
It's very light on its feet.
Yeah.
Very charming. Very charming wine. I'm amazed, actually. Bravo. Well done.
And no cork.
I don't like that.
No cork.
I prefer a cork.
Anyways, we highly recommend these wines, and I hope you've enjoyed.
Oh, wait. We're drinking Canadian in the time of one of the most proud moments in Canadian history. Wouldn't you say?
I would say that.
I am extremely proud to be a Canadian in the last number of weeks.
100%.
And the unity that Canada has shown.
Yeah.
And the pride in our history is coming through loud and clear with elbows up for everybody. And I think this is a wonderful development, as we always speak about unintended consequences. And I don't think the Trump administration anticipated this kind of unification of Canada. I think it's wonderful, and I'm glad to be drinking Canadian wines in honor
And that's why it's here.
in honor of
and
this.
we will continue drinking Canadian wines for the time being, especially since this geopolitical turmoil while it's going on, because I think it's crucially important. And in a very small way, shows our solidarity with
Good
the
word.
movement that you're
Solidarity
talking.
is an excellent word. Yeah. And I'm glad we revisited topic one in the podcast, because the way this city is developing.
Big challenge, though. Huge
Big challenge, but I'm glad we're thinking about it and talking about it. I think this is one of the number one issues that confront our city. Forget about transportation,
I agree.
etc.
I agree.
This is a huge issue for Toronto.
I agree. And we'll keep following up on it as things develop. And I'd be very curious to see some of these new projects and how they're reconfigured, and if in fact they satisfy this need that we've talked about. And I certainly hope that they do, because the city needs it.
And maybe in future podcasts we can bring concrete examples and show, like, this development is looking at moving.
And we will.
Moving into this number of 2 bedrooms, this number of 3 bedrooms, and see how that mix is shaking out. And then we can track whether it's actually working.
And see who the end users are
Exactly.
as well.
Are they selling these things?
Correct.
So Chris and I were thinking that for those of you who are watching our podcasts on a regular basis, we would encourage you, and we'd be grateful if you would send in some comments or questions or thoughts about what topics you'd like us to cover, and we'd be glad to consider that
100%,
and put them out there. That'd be terrific. So please.
I might
go ahead
even
and do
add
so.
any suggestions as to wines.
Well, now we're on to the Canadian theme, so it might have to wait, but please do.
But
make
they
those
could be
suggestions.
Canadian. They could be from the
Fair enough,
bench.
good
They
point.
could be
Yeah, we could do
Niagara.
Niagara wines next, or BC wines.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Because this is a home run.
Yeah. So, please.
And by doing so, you're saving the contents of my wine cellar, so I'm grateful to all of you for those suggestions. Particularly Chris doesn't like him anymore anyhow. So that's it. Well done.
On that note,
Bravo. Thanks.
thank you for watching this podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to the next one.
Looking forward to the next one. Bye, everyone.